Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. Ben Dueck. Ben is a Canadian entrepreneur with a wide variety of experience throughout his career. He started his first business as a teenager and has spent time in a variety of work environments ever since. He's worked in the church, in non-profits, at a summer camp, in post-secondary education, in the Chamber of Commerce network, and as a small business owner more than 3 times if you count his teenage venture. To his everlasting regret, he missed the birth of his second daughter when he was taking a course for his Masters of Arts in Leadership degree. Above everything though, he enjoys being a father to 3 children, 16, 10 and 5, and a husband to Kendra. And he's thankful that his most recent entrepreneurial venture allows him to be at home more often, to be a husband and a father. So this week on Heart of Dad, I'm really delighted to introduce Ben Dueck. Hi, Ben.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here. So Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself. If you can tell us about your family situation and your work situation, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. Maybe first off, I should say I am from Canada. I don't know if where most of your listeners listen in from, but my accent will be different than maybe some of your guests you've had. I'll bring the Canadian flair today. So I live in the center of Canada near Winnipeg, if anyone knows Canadian geography, almost exactly in the center of the country. So, and I have a wife and I have 3 kids. I have a 16-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, and I have a 5-year-old. They are almost exactly 5.5 years apart between them, which was not part of our plan. And maybe we can chat about that a little bit later if you want. And I run a business, a leadership development company. So Cantera Leadership is my company. And I help individuals and teams and organizations increase their leadership capacity. And that helps with individuals to be better leaders, teams to maybe work better together, and then also organizations to help them function more effectively as individuals within the context of an organization and a team. And I'm a Gallup certified Clifton strengths coach, which I integrate into a lot of what I do as well.
Fantastic. I mean, that's a great mission that you're on at the moment, and there's lots to pick up on, including your family and what you've been sharing with me about kind of the spacing of your kids. But I also know from our chat before, Ben, that you've had a really interesting career, kind of spanning very many different kind of areas, and it'd be great just to hear a few minutes about that as well, because that caught my attention when we spoke before.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I've had a wide variety of experiences since I guess became an adult, I guess I could say. I mean, I had a lot of different jobs before that, of course, as well. But one of my first jobs that I did, I actually ran a small little painting company for a number of years, actually just 2 years. It was called College Pro Painters, which was a franchise. I'm not sure if that operates out in the UK area at all, but it's a franchise where the focus is on college-age students running a company and hiring college-age students to paint houses. And so I did that in the midst of some of my studies that I was in. And then I was involved in church work. I became a youth pastor for a number of years in a church, a small church here in rural Canada, and did that while I was still doing some painting company stuff on the side. And then I went and became a director at a summer camp. In Canada here, at least, summer camp is a pretty big deal. So it's where parents send their kids for a week or 2 weeks, and they get to do a lot of different activities, whether it's mostly outdoor activities, mountain biking, or stuff on the water with water skiing or wakeboarding or canoeing and those kind of things. And so I directed a summer camp for a number of years as well, where I was doing a lot of leadership development work, because my main role was working with these young adults. They were the staff members. We had these 16 to 23-year-olds. They were the ones who ran the camp, other than us older people. At that time, I wasn't that old, but I was older than them. And it was fantastic doing that for a number of years. It was then when I went and got my Master's of Arts in Leadership degree while I was at the summer camp. And when I left camp, I went and started a company, and got into the construction industry. So I ran a property development company, got some houses and condos built in the area where I live in Manitoba, center of Canada here, and enjoyed that for a number of years. My business partner was my dad. at that point. I always joked around where my dad was the brains and the bank. He had the money and the knowledge, and I was his legs. And I just went and did what he told me to do to make sure that things got done properly. And I ran that company for a number of years. And my next stop was a couple of years of fundraising. So I was a fundraiser. So I went around and asked people for money to support a small college that I was working at. It was a Bible college here in Central Canada, and spent some time doing that. And then I got involved in the Chamber of Commerce network, and I know there is Chamber of Commerce in the UK area as well. So I was an executive director for a small chamber, relatively speaking, a small chamber, although it was one of the larger ones in the area where I live, and did that for a couple of years before venturing off into leadership development full time. First as an associate with an organization, and then just in the last year launching Cantera Leadership. So it's a mouthful. That's the brief version of that story, Matt.
I love it, and I love hearing people's kind of career journeys. And even to me, who only knows you a little bit, Ben, I can see a through line of leadership in all that work. But I'm curious to know, like, what even by many people's standards, it's quite a journey of different sort of disciplines and types of organizations you've been in. And what swept you along that particular path? Do you have a sense of it?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So some of it tied in with some of the, spirituality tied in with the faith commitment that I have, where I felt like it was a calling that I had to go and invest in the lives of others around me. And so, some of my initial decisions, to work within a church, work within a camp, and some of those opportunities were to be that kind of an agent of transformation to some of these other individuals that I was working with. And I think that was a part of it. And then the other part of it was this strong desire I've always had to be someone who grows in my own leadership, but also grows leadership in others. So each of the paths that I went on, and you nailed it pretty well, were focused around that opportunity to invest in my own leadership development, but also into the lives of these others. And even the fundraising, which might seem like a very strange choice to say, hey, how is that investing in the lives of others? But it was fundraising for an organization that I believed in, and the mission that they had was to work with young adults and help them become better leaders within the context of where they were at. So for me to be able to go and share that story with potential donors allowed them to then invest into the lives of these younger leaders that were being developed. And part of it too, I like variety too. So you can see some of the different variety and different experiences. The entrepreneurial kind of flair as well shines through with some of that, and wanting to experience some new things. And I think it actually lends itself really well to what I've now feel like I've landed on for the next season. Hopefully it's a longer season than some is what my plan is. We'll see where it all goes. But this opportunity now to continue to do that, but in a more narrow focused kind of that's basically, all the other roles I had, there was so much different variety in what it involved. There's some leadership development, obviously, but there's a lot of other ones as well. This here is now a lot of being able to help develop leaders to invest in the success of organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and draw them forward towards something I'm really passionate about, helping them be better.
Mm. And what was the trigger point for starting this particular business?
Yeah, so I think it kind of was birthed out of 10 years ago when I took my Master's of Arts in Leadership. I remember people asking me, so why'd you take this degree? And, why'd you get involved in this? And my answer at that point was, primarily at that point, it was, I wanted to be a better leader in the context that I was in. It was like, I really feel like I can grow in my own leadership ability and in investing in the lives of others around me. But there's kind of the second part of that answer was, one day I'd love to be able to do leadership development consulting, coaching, business coaching, like that kind of a thing in the future. And so that was kind of where the seed was planted. And then over the years, the different experiences I had, I kept having that kind of idea reinforced either through the roles that I had or through people coming and talking to me. There's always been people, always, I don't know if always is the right way of saying it, but quite often I've had people come talk to me and say, hey, let's go for coffee, or let's go chat, and they would talk to me about some of the things that they were working through or wrestling through. And I found myself in these opportunities to share with them, not that I'm an expert or, the only answer, the be all and end all of anything, but rather to share some of my own insights and experience and speak into them and into their challenges and maybe, hopefully, provide some value. And so when this opportunity came to launch a business around doing that, around leadership, I embraced it. It kind of brought together all the different education and experience I've had into this, narrow focus of investing into that for others.
That's a brilliant story, Ben. And what about kind of the financial side of starting your own business at this point? Because just sort of tracking back through the career, so I guess your last role before that was Chamber of Commerce, is that right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I worked a little bit as an associate with an individual who did something very similar to what I'm doing, but before that was with the Chamber of Commerce. Yes.
So, I'm always interested in people's stories about like when the moment becomes right to strike off on their own and take that leap. And I'm particularly interested in the purpose of this podcast is for people who are parents as well, dads, because to me, it creates an additional kind of dimension. I don't want to use the word pressure, but sometimes there's a pressure as well. You're kind of doing something that's a passion for you. I hear that through line of leadership throughout your career, and you're also taking a risk, because starting your own business there's an element of risk, isn't there? And we're recording this just at the start of the pandemic, right? And we were talking about the impact on both of our businesses of this pandemic, which is of course affecting everybody in the world to some degree. So I was kind of interested in your how it came about, for you to take that moment of risk, should we say, into starting out on your own.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it's not an easy thing to wrestle through, I think, for most people when they go down that path. And it was something, my wife and I, we talked about it a lot. And I think she was a little more nervous about it even initially than I was, partly because I feel like I have a little bit of that entrepreneurial risk-taking mindset. But for us, and for me as the dad, as the father, and in our family, I am the sole provider for our family. There was that fear of, what if it doesn't work, and what is going to happen? Can we afford this? And I think that the story probably is better to be told talking about even the year earlier, before I launched this company. The organization that I was working with as an associate, the original plan was to work together to see if we could become partners. He was an individual who was working on his own. He had a company he'd been running for a couple of years. And even that step, it was kind of like maybe a good initial step to try, because there was risk associated with that step as well, because there wasn't guaranteed income there. I mean, he had a more established company that I would be, partnering up with. So there was some, established clientele, but it was still a lot of, this is going to rest on what can you do to, build the business and bring in some revenue. And that is going to be a big challenge. So even in that time, my wife and I wrestled through that question. What does this mean? I had an opportunity to go work, 6-figure sales manager for an organization. If I would have wanted it, the guy came and talked to me and said, "Hey, this opportunity is here for you. Go work for me and do this, and we'll, solid income, steady revenue." But it was a matter of balancing. Did I want to do that, or did I want to pursue something that fit with a passion of mine that I've always wanted to do? So at that point, going into the partnership thing, I said, "Yeah, let's do this." My wife was on board because it was less risky than going on my own. But we tried the partnership for about 7 months, and we realized this isn't a good fit. It wasn't like there was any hard feelings behind it. It just wasn't the right fit. And so then we had to decide again, now what? And again, it became a challenging choice. I think partly going through that first decision with my wife and saying, are we willing to take this smaller risk, this partnership kind of opportunity? I think that helped us both be ready for the next opportunity, where we kind of got to the point where if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? Even though we hadn't made a lot of money the previous 7 months under that partnership, if we don't do it now, when are we going to have an opportunity? And I don't want to regret not doing it, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, thinking, oh, why didn't I try that when I had that opportunity? So even though it's been a very financially challenging decision to make, we said, let's try it. And we ventured out. We've had to, invest a lot of time without a lot of revenue return. Of course, when anyone starts a business, there's a lot of the beginning months and years often can be challenging in that way. But we've been able to make it work. We've had to take out a business loan to help manage that. So in the next number of months now, especially with the pandemic you mentioned, it's going to be challenging to know how will this all shake down. But I think that it won't be a regret if it doesn't work out. And I'm not planning on it not working out, of course. But if it doesn't work out, I think it's going to be me being able to say, I took this step because I felt like it was a passion of mine I wanted to pursue, and it was the right time for it. Mm-hmm. And regardless of what happens, it's going to help me learn a lot and grow a lot. And my plan is still to have a big, successful business at the end of it all.
I love that sort of mindset you have around it, Ben. It's courageous, but it's also really aligned. It sounds really aligned with what you want out of your life. And that's a great place to start a business from. Well, I'm curious that you've got kids at three very different stages, and what kind of story have you been telling them about starting off in this business? How they lived this experience?
Well, they've been very supportive. I mean, they obviously different ages. They don't quite understand it the same way. My oldest, 16, she's been fantastic. When we were making this decision, she was very on board with it all. She thought it was a no-brainer. Just obviously launch the business and do it. It sounds like something that you really are passionate about. So she's been very supportive. I've actually plugged her into being, I call her my office assistant. So she spends a couple hours a week. At this point, it's a lot of cleaning my office because I'm not necessarily the cleanest office keeper, but I've been slowly introducing other things with her as well. So it becomes a family dynamic with her. My 10-year-old, she just is just glad to have me around and a little more often around the house. But she's very supportive as well. And then my 5-year-old is limited understanding of it all. He seems to enjoy having me around too. And just, when you say what kind of story have I been sharing, before coming down to my office to talk with you, they were all upstairs and I went and chatted with them and I said, hey, just a reminder, I'm going down to record a podcast and just encourage you guys, play your part in running the business and have a nice quiet morning so that they could, be a part of that experience as well. So who knows, they might not be quiet. We might hear some background noise, but that wasn't a negative thing for them to hear that. That was an invitation to be part of it, right? And so we view it very much as a family experience to have me around more than maybe what I have been at different times. And then they're a part of it.
And how's that played out for you, Ben? Because I know one of the tensions, certainly in the initial phases of businesses, well, for me at least, I don't want to speak for you, but has been to throw myself 100% into the business, and at times I would say it's been a preoccupation or even an obsession to, particularly if you're trying to set things up financially and get some income in. And being at home is a blessing, as you say, you get to be around with your kids more, but also it can be a tension because if you're in the basement there, I guess you've got the noise of family life going on. I'm in the attic here, and likewise I hear family life going on, and there's sometimes a pull and sometimes a need actually for me to step out and come back into the family situation when I'm working. How's that playing out for you?
Yeah, it's a good question because that tension is always there. And partly because even before this pandemic kicked in and now all the schools are closed, we homeschool our kids, and we can talk about why we chose to do that years ago, but we've always homeschooled our kids. So they've been around right since the beginning of launching this business. And as a dad, there's those times where I hear things maybe not going 100% upstairs, whether it's screaming or foot stomping or doors slamming. And there's been this learning process that I've had to go through to know, okay, when is the time for me to go up and engage as, the helpful, partner in the marriage and parenting process, or when are the times when I just need to sit back and release it. And my wife and I had some very good conversations around that because she wanted to really let me know and try to give me the confidence that while there might be times that she does need me and she would try to let me know when, she wanted to give me the confidence that I wouldn't need to always run when I hear the screaming or run when I hear the door slamming or the fighting. And I think that's been super helpful for her to be able to reassure me at times where, it's okay. You don't need to come up. We've got this. On the flip side, there are times when I do choose to go up, and it's been very helpful for our marriage, but also for our kids as well, because my wife does work hard with trying to manage that. And for me to go up and be there to support her or to not even necessarily just support her, but to be there as a father and to be there as the person who helps talk through some of those screaming fits. It's been an interesting balance. We don't have it perfectly all the time, and sometimes I go up when the screaming happens and I wouldn't have needed to, and there's other times where I probably should have went up and I didn't, we probably won't ever get it perfect, because that's just the balance between it.
But it sounds like you've kind of at least got a working arrangement clear in your own mind and with your wife about what your expectations are, which sounds really, really healthy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I just wanted to switch focus a little bit. When we spoke ahead of the recording last time, you were telling me a little bit about the story of, that your children are 5.5 years apart, and I wondered whether you'd be willing to talk a little bit about, what's happened for you as a family in terms of having your children, and and the impact of being a dad with a 16-year-old and a 5-year-old, which I think probably create its own challenges.
Yeah, we always like to talk about how we get to enjoy all three phases at once, which is, I think, most families that we connect with, there's more that are on the 2-year program, the 2-year program being their kids are, 18 months to 24 months apart, it seems, right? And so for us, it wasn't a conscious choice that we spaced them out to 5.5 years apart. We never actually really knew if we'd be able to even have children, partly because there's some issues with that in my wife's family. And when we had our first child, it was completely, I wouldn't say by accident necessarily, but it was completely out of the blue, a surprise, whatever. All of a sudden, we're having a kid. And so that was great. We thought, so maybe we won't have these infertility issues. Maybe we won't have any problems with having children. And we had a wonderful little girl, and she was fantastic. And we thought we were amazing parents, by the way, because she was just just such a compliant, obedient, friendly, outgoing, right from when she was a baby. All these parents would talk about how much troubles they were having with their kids, and we were like, I guess we're just good parents. Well, I'll finish the rest of that story later. So it ended up that we wanted to have more kids than just one, and it just wasn't working out for us. We had years of trying to figure out, will we be able to have more children? We had to go to fertility clinics. We had to see a lot of different specialists. It was tough, especially on my wife a lot, because it was related to her. She had some endometriosis kind of health issues and infertility challenges. And of course, it's always hard as a dad too, I wanted more kids, but also just to see your wife go through those challenges and the pain and the frustration. And even though we knew it wasn't anything she could really do about it herself, oftentimes people put that on themselves. It's my fault. It wasn't anything that was her fault. So it was really hard for both of us. And we tried all the different ways of trying to have more kids, and it just wasn't working. So finally we just gave up. We thought, we have one kid. She's great. She's the best kid ever. We're the best parents ever, whatever the reason why she was so good. I guess we're just having one kid, and we kind of wrapped our heads around what that would mean. And we were content, I think, is a good way of saying it. It's not like we wouldn't have wanted more children still, but we were able to get to the point where we were content. And of course, like we've heard with other people in those kind of situations, within 6 months after that kind of processing, all of a sudden we were pregnant again. And there was nothing specific that we had done differently during that time period, other than the stress and the pressure had been taken off. And my wife, during that time period, she had some surgeries around the endometriosis. There were some different cysts and cleaning some stuff up down there. And so some of that was part of the challenge as well. So we thought it was an amazing blessing to now have child number 2. And child number 2 is another girl. And that's where we realized that it wasn't our parenting that made our number 1 so amazing. It was the difference between our children. Number 2 she's a fantastic daughter. But as a baby, she was a lot more of a challenging baby. Of course, not all those different kind of things, not sleeping, being picky, not being outgoing, and all those kind of challenges. And that was good. We had another couple of years of that, and we were trying to figure out, do we want child number 3? And it was a really hard decision to even decide that we wanted more children because of the challenges that we'd went through. It was so hard to see the pain and the struggles and the difficulties. And it wasn't even just actually leading up to the pregnancy of our second child. It was the postpartum happened afterwards from my wife as well, that it wasn't something that was super enjoyable in a lot of ways. Even though we had this wonderful child, the process leading up to having her and the postpartum afterwards was difficult compared to number one, where we didn't have any of those challenges. And so we were trying to figure out, do we want more children? And there's a part of me that just didn't. I don't want to see you go through that pain again. I was telling my wife, I don't want to see you go through those challenges again. It just hurt me to see you hurting so much. And I don't know if I want to go through that whole process of even trying to have kids again, because that was a long, arduous, challenging time as well. It ended up that we weren't actually trying hard or anything really officially, and all of a sudden we were pregnant again. And so we actually had to go through the process, 5.5 years. I mean, it wasn't 5.5 years, minus 9 months of, now it is happening. And we didn't want, it was this tension, because it's not like we didn't want more kids. We didn't want the challenges and the pain and the hardship that we had experienced around number two to happen again. So our number three, our little guy, so 2 girls and then a boy, did come along, and we still went through the postpartum after. In fact, it might have been even harder than number 2, which was, again, very challenging. But so, and we didn't even know if we'd be able to have a third because of all the challenges we had with number 2, right? So even that whole decision of, do we want to go through that again from a fertility standpoint? So challenging. That's why they ended up being 5.5 years apart, not because of, how we planned things, not because of, with the way we wanted it, but now when we look back on it, and I think this is, again, common to most parents when they look at their families, we look at our family and the ages of our kids, and we wouldn't want it any other way. We love it the way it is, even though there are challenges with a 16-year-old and a 5-year-old in the same house. And our little guy says that he has 2 moms, or 3 moms, because he's got a 10-year-old older sister, a 16-year-old older sister, and then his real mom, right? So, that's kind of been the process we went through on that, and we love it. Is it challenging with those 3 age brackets? Absolutely, there's different challenges, but everyone's got their challenges. I look at families that have, kids, 18 months apart, and they've got 3 of them, and they're all within, 5 and under, or in that 5-year bracket. And they've got their own challenges of juggling diapers with 3 kids sometimes at the same time, right? And some of those kind of things we didn't have to experience because we spaced them out.
Right. It's an amazing story, Ben. And, just talking about your wife's struggles after the birth of your second and third children. Mm-hmm. And I guess, you were out at work at that time. How did you live that experience where, she was in her own struggles and you had new babies to deal with? What was the impact on you as the dad in the family?
Yeah, there's this part of being in that situation that I felt, and I think a lot of dads feel this way, that they aren't able to be real with how hard that is, because it's already so hard on their spouse that they don't want to add to that burden. And I think I felt that a lot, and I think there's value to that as well as downside to that. I think that it's okay to sometimes not add more weight onto your spouse who's going through those challenges and going through, especially postpartum, where it's a mental health issue where it's not that they don't want to be able to handle additional weight of those kind of things, but are they actually even able to handle those kind of things because their mental health is already in such a challenging spot with all the different, I'm not a mental health expert but those chemical issues and imbalances and all those things that are being dealt with. And so it was I think a lot harder on me than I would ever even let on to see that, because it's hard to see someone you love go through pain and go through challenges and go through those difficulties. And it's something where you want to solve the problem, or I wanted to solve the problem. Maybe not everyone does, but I think it's a pretty natural tendency. We want to solve problems when they're in front of us. And there's very little that I could do to solve it. And so it was really hard on me. I did have some opportunities to share with others around me, which I think was an important step in my own process. People that I could talk to about how hard it was. And then there, as my wife was processing it all and kind of coming out of the postpartum, navigating that balance between being open with where I was at or the challenges that I had experienced, and also being still careful as to at what point we talk about those things or didn't talk about those things. So I think it was a combination of that, kind of trying to navigate the timing of it all, but also having people that were part of the support for me. And there's one or two people that I would talk to at times. It still wasn't a perfect healing process, even for me, but that helped.
I can imagine. I'm curious to know, like, if there was a moment where you felt, or moments where you felt that the pressure was just too much, that you were having to hold, with certainly when your third came along, a family with 3 children at different stages, you've got a lot of compassion for your wife. She's suffering. She's doing the absolute best she can. She doesn't want to be in that situation. You're going out to earn money for the family, but you're also trying to be there emotionally. And I don't know what it felt like for you, but it sounds like it has the potential to be high pressure and also very lonely. And I wonder what it was like for you.
Yeah, definitely. And even on top of those, career and family and parenting and a wife who's wrestling through some postpartum things, I was involved in other things as well. I was involved in my church leadership team. And I just felt like I was juggling all these balls, right? Like 10 different balls I was juggling, and felt like I couldn't actually juggle all 10. Like I couldn't actually keep up with juggling them all. And some of them felt much bigger than other ones too. So throwing certain ones up as I'm in the juggling process to carry the metaphor on further. And some of them felt almost too heavy to even toss into the air. And some of them felt like, oh, do I even want to try catching that one again? Or which ones can I drop? And I think part of it is this idea too, that we all have, or that I wrestled through, is not wanting to show weakness, not wanting to drop a ball, because we have to, again, I'm saying this have to with quotation marks around it, we have to be perfect. We have to at least show perfection to those around us. Especially for dads, we often might feel like we have to show that to our circles that we interact with, because we're supposed to have it all together, and we're supposed to not have these issues. And that additional pressure was one of those balls that I was juggling too. And I think we all kind of try to figure out how to juggle that to a certain extent. And so it was a lonely thing, like you mentioned, because it didn't feel like you were even able to express how real that challenge was. You kind of, I'll share a little bit on this corner of it, or this corner of it, or I'll share a little piece over here, or a little piece over here, but never that full nugget. And I think that's where I would encourage people, after going through it myself, and I didn't do it perfectly, or didn't do it really well, even if I look back on it. I mean, maybe I did it okay. I survived, and my wife survived, and our kids are doing good, and my wife's doing good. But I would encourage people to is there places that you can be real and share that nugget, the full nugget, with someone, with others around you? Maybe that's a counselor, maybe that's a close friend, maybe that's a coach. If you're involved in a church, maybe that's a pastor, someone who works at the church. I don't know for each of your listeners kind of who that might be, but is there someone that you can be real with and understand that by being real, that's not a bad thing, because most people appreciate that vulnerability. We like to tell ourselves the lie that people don't want to hear all the junk that I have, but there's real value to having that kind of relationship with someone.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for sharing so openly about that. I think it will really help other dads who are listening, who also feel that pressure to hold it all, to keep juggling all those balls in the way that you described. I think it's amazing. Just sort of rolling back to your career story, one of the things I've been exploring with other dads on the podcast, Ben, is about their relationship with their own dads and how that's molded them, either for good or bad, as dads themselves. And you had a business with your dad for a while, but I'm just wondering about your own relationship with your dad. Is how has that imprinted you as a dad now?
Yeah, and it was interesting going into business with my dad. One of the things that we talked about right off the bat was that our relationship as father-son was more important than our business. And we tried to remind ourselves of that regularly. And our business wasn't, we didn't have a lot of stress or tension within it. There were times where we didn't necessarily get along or see things eye to eye, or sometimes, his desire for things a certain way didn't, align with my desire for how I wanted to see it happen. But overall, we did operate fairly well together. And we always kept that, at least I did. I haven't actually talked to him about it after, as to how much it was in his mind, but I often had it in my mind that our relationship as a father-son was more important than the success of the business. And I know not every business that is a family business works out that way, whether it's father-son or siblings or whatever the case is. And so, yeah, I think that when I think back to being kind of growing up with my dad, one of the things that I always appreciated about it, and I've tried to be very conscious of it with my own kids, and that's partly I think why we've appreciated homeschooling. It wasn't a part of the reason why we chose to homeschool, but was my dad he was an entrepreneur. He ran a business, a couple different businesses as I was growing up, and he would invite me to be a part of it in small ways as much as he could. So whether that was, he would sometimes have to drive to go meet with a client or a potential client, or on a sales call, for example, I would sometimes hop in the vehicle with him and drive, and sometimes it'd be an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. In Canada here, that's not very far yet, but 2 hours. But sometimes I'd be in the car with him for 2 hours. I'd stay in the car while he went and did a sales call. I wouldn't go in with him because that might look weird, but I would spend that time with him. And sometimes that wouldn't mean a lot of conversations because he'd be on the phone even while driving. He had one of the first kind of car phones back in the day that was around in Canada. And so sometimes he'd be making calls while we were driving or whatever the case was, but just being with him as he would do things with his business. And we were always welcome to drop by the business. And one of his businesses was a lumber yard. And I remember climbing on stacks of lumber and crawling through rolls of carpet and, different things like that, which sometimes I don't know if he knew everything we did around the lumber yard, but overall, I think he recognized the value of us being a part of what he was doing, even if it wasn't directly with what he was doing. And that was at a young age. As I got older, he invited me more often to be involved in more practical ways as well. I still remember one time they had a conference for their clients, and he asked if I wanted to be the videographer for one of the sessions, basically record the session and then the video would be available to other people at the conference afterward. And I still remember that I was in charge of back in those days, this giant video camera on this tripod, and I was responsible for videotaping it. And I knocked the camera over and it shattered on the ground. I don't remember how old I was exactly, but I thought this was a disaster. And in some ways it was. Cameras weren't cheap back then. I mean, they're cheaper now than they were back then. And this was a decent quality camera, VHS tape in there type of thing at that time. And I just felt terrible, but I remember there was a lot of graciousness that he provided in the midst of that. So there's times where he's been, held me to a high standard as well. And there's been times where that's been tough, but I think there's also times where he's just been so incredibly gracious when I have dropped the ball or literally dropped the camera, that I've been able to try to use that as my own reminder when I'm parenting. And I'm not perfect at it. I have high standards for my kids sometimes too. Sometimes I drive them nuts with how I expect them to, act or live or make decisions. But that graciousness, I think, was there that my dad showed too. So I think those two things, stand out to me on the kind of spur of the moment question that you asked me here. The time that he spent with me kind of within his work that he did, but also the graciousness.
They're beautiful, both those things. I mean, I love how that entrepreneurial spirit that you talked about at the beginning of the call, is kind of the seed was planted for that very early in your life by watching your dad and being welcomed into his world.
Yes.
There's something really cool about being able to tag along with dad. I think I know the times when I went as a kid to my dad's office, they were like, wow, I really felt like I was being kind of welcomed into the inner sanctum of his world that was normally invisible to me. So I can really appreciate that. And that idea of graciousness around difficulty is, I really hear that as a flexibility, but also an honoring children where they are.
Yeah.
Just to sort of throw the dice the other way, Ben, are there things that you've actively chosen not to do that your dad did?
Well, that's a good question. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've actively chosen not to do, and I'm sure with more time I could think of some. I know that my dad, in the midst of even just the way that he grew up and the different things that he did, he was very generous even with the things that he would purchase, and whether it's video games or computers and different things like that. And I think I've tried to be a lot more cautious with with the access that I give my kids to some of those kind of newfangled toys and computer games or whatever it might be. And not because that's been a conscious decision that I look at my dad and I say, hey, maybe that shouldn't have happened, but more as even a sign of some of our cultural trends where there's more and more challenges along how do you handle things like devices and social media and types of things. So it might be rooted in some of that myself, because I knew how much some of those things hooked into me as a kid. They can be very addicting, and that wasn't before, when iPhone existed or social media existed when I was growing up. So this day and age, I think our kids have that as a big challenge in front of them that we never had to deal with when I was growing up.
Yeah, I love that you've seen that. I think when I grew up, there definitely were TV-based video games, and my dad was very against them. Actually, I think he'd seen for himself that they had this capacity to kind of suck us in. So it was always like forbidden fruit for me. But when my friends had these things, it was like super exciting. But so I want to switch direction again if we can. And one of the things that you generously offered me when we were chatting was to do the Clifton Strengths Test, which is part of your repertoire as a leadership coach. And I was intrigued by that because I've done various leadership measurements before in the context of businesses I've been in, and found them interesting and insightful. But I'd never thought of them in relation to kind of my personal life and fatherhood specifically. And I was wondering, what your take on it was. Do you use this instrument? It's clearly one that you've chosen as the one that you feel best reflects people in their individual strengths and capacities. So, tell me a bit more about the test and how you see it sort of mapping onto fatherhood. And you can obviously give me some insights about my own responses if it's not too damning.
Well, I don't think most of the time it's pretty safe to talk about the people's results because it talks about what they're good at usually, right? So I think it would be a positive thing. But I can give I'll give the Coles Notes version of the assessment for yourself, but also for any of your listeners if they haven't taken it, or even if they have, they might be reminded of something. And so the Clifton Strengths Assessment tool, it was developed. The original development of it was from a guy named Donald Clifton, which is why it's titled Clifton Strengths. And he kind of had the question back when he was studying this. Most of the resources at that time, when it came to personal improvement or leadership improvement or whatever the case was, focused on fixing weaknesses. So it was focused on kind of this negative-based mindset as to how can we fix these weaknesses. And he was trying to research whether that was effective, and he basically found there's no research that showed that actually brought about more success in individuals. And so he said, what would happen if we started with strengths? And so he developed a bunch of research around it and kind of came up with the Strengths Finder assessment. He did come up with this list of 34 different talent themes. And the idea behind it is when you take the assessment, you discover what your top talents are, and then you can turn them into strengths by investing in them. So you have your talent times investment equals strength, which becomes this ability to consistently produce these positive outcomes wherever it might be, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's in your church or in wherever you're volunteering, whatever the case might be. And it kind of flipped the mindset. So the traditional conventional approach to development is talking a lot about maintaining your strengths but fixing your weaknesses, which the idea that weakness fixing leads to success isn't really very accurate. The strength-based approach looks at it and says, we're going to actually focus on your strengths and manage around your weaknesses, right? So it's not saying that people don't have weaknesses, but it's trying to say, we're going to try to manage around them, put enough time into the weaknesses so that they don't become a wall or a stumbling block. But let's not invest so much time to perfect those. Let's rather start with what are you naturally talented at, and how can we then integrate that into more consistent actions, behaviors in your life, right? And so weakness fixing prevents failure. That's a good way of saying it, but strengths building leads towards success. So when you take the assessment, you get your list. There's 1 through 34, but the results the ones that you got access to is your top 5. People can get the full 34 report as well, but oftentimes it's better to start with the top 5 anyway, because people, when they see the full 34, what their natural tendency is to do is to focus on the bottom, which isn't the point. Let's start with what you're good at. And so for you, you took the assessment and you had your top 5 there. And So when I work with individuals or teams, one of the things that I help them understand first is kind of, hey, what are your 5? Do you have questions around them? Do you want further explanations around them? Because sometimes they're words or phrases or concepts that don't really come up often, or they don't think of often, or might be new to see it in that certain way. After they kind of understand them a little bit better, then kind of helping people to see where have they seen these talents in action in their lives. So where have you seen this bring about success? Where have you seen this be important for you in the past? And then helping them take the next step and now aiming that discussion or aiming those talents towards what's next. So if I was talking with someone from just a coaching perspective, and one of your talents, for example, your third one on your list was ideation. So I would talk to someone and say, hey, first I would ask, do you have any questions about ideation? Does it make sense to you? Then I would ask questions like, when have you seen, and I'll ask you this question, Matt, I'm curious your response. When have you seen ideation, the ability to be able to be creative and come up with new ideas and concepts and kind of insights? That's the very brief version of the explanation, of course. If you read through, I'm not sure if you read through the report, but if you read through the report, that more thorough explanation, have you seen times in your life where that has brought about success in your business or life or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And funny enough, from my philosophy of coaching, then I see ideation as an innate capacity for all of us, actually, though it may be more to the fore in some than others. And I see it all the time in my life. I mean, in the creation of my businesses and in my interaction with my son and my partner, and thinking about how I'm coping with the current situation with the pandemic. So and that was a very resonant kind of strength for me. And I love kind of in your positioning of it that something that also aligns for me, which is swimming with the tide of our own talents rather than swimming against the tide. Really, life is so much more effortful when we're kind of trying to fix all the weaknesses, and I love that idea that sort of bringing this back into the kind of realm of fatherhood, particularly because I've had a successful career and achieved a lot in my professional career. Fatherhood, there's no instruction manual, there's no training as such. You're thrown into it, and I've had some definite bumps in the road, and I think we can easily tip into kind of the self-criticism, like where are the gaps, where are the failings, how am I not matching up as a dad, either to my expectations or what I think other people might be thinking about me. So this kind of strength-based model I think could be really helpful for dads to really celebrate where they're leveraging the best of themselves as a dad, but also acknowledging that there are areas to develop perhaps as well. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree. And I think that relates directly to the strengths assessment, the Clifton Strengths Assessment. And I think when you ask the question, how would I encourage people to even apply this to parenting and to being a dad? You nailed the first part of it, is I think recognizing what your own talents are, what your own innate talents are that you can bring to the table, and owning those and celebrating them is a huge first thing. And I mean, whether that's taking the assessment directly yourself or just understanding more about who you are and what you bring to the table is huge. I think the next step is then starting to kind of say, well, what do my kids bring to the table? What's unique and innate about them, right? I mean, I talked about my 2 first children that that we thought we were such amazing parents until we realized that it was just some of it was personality based or type of the child that we had, and so understanding what our kids bring to the table, and there's one. Even if your kids don't take the assessment, and there is a different version for 10 to 14-year-olds that can be taken as well. It gives 10 different themes that you can use. It helps as a tool as a parent, and if people want to try that out, they can check that out online as well. But even if you don't take the assessment for yourself or for your kids, there's these 5 clues to talent. So in psychology, there's these 5 questions that you can ask. Yearning, for example, what activities are you naturally drawn to, or what activities are your kids naturally drawn to? Rapid learning, what kinds of activities do you seem to pick up quickly that maybe others don't? Again, with kids, what are they able to pick up quickly that others don't? One might be really good at math, the other one might not be good at math, and they pick it up quicker than the other one. Flow is a really fun question because it's where you ask the question, what activities do you seem to automatically know the steps to be taken? right? Where it just came to me. I just knew what to do, right? I mean, that's flow. And then you can see that in yourself or in your kids, for example, at different times. Glimpses of excellence. During which activities have you had these moments of subconscious excellence where you thought, how did I do that? Man, like I nailed that, right? And like, how is that so good? And you can see that in your kids sometimes too, right? And being able to answer that kind of a question. And then the last one out of the five clues to talent is the satisfaction component. So which activities give you a kick, or this thrill, either while doing them or immediately after finishing them, where you're like, when can I do that again? I'm not talking about addicting things like cell phone games, right, or whatever, but things that you do beyond that. And I think as a parent, we can start asking those kind of questions to identify the uniqueness of who we are, but also the uniqueness of our kids, and then start celebrating that with our kids and help them tap into that. Once they start to see, oh, this is where I have these 5 natural, these clues to talent, and this is where my talents lie, you start seeing them shine a lot more. And I'm not perfect at doing that with my kids. I'm still learning, right? But asking those kind of questions and drawing that forth is going to be something where your kids can start seeing that satisfaction. And whether it's at the workplace or not, I mean, the company that the certification and the coaching that I do is based through is Gallup. I'm not sure in the UK how familiar people are with Gallup, but they do research around the world. And the percentage increase in even just job satisfaction or life satisfaction when you are able to tap into your innate talents, they've studied that as being exponentially higher than when you aren't tapping into them. And so I want that for my kids. I want them to be able to tap into the things that they're naturally talented at, naturally good at, invest in those things so that when they're out in the real world, they're able to clearly know what they bring to the table and how to bring that to wherever they are. And I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do with our kids.
I love what you've just shared there, Ben. And it seems to me that those questions are an absolutely fantastic framework to get curious about your kids and
yes.
to really shine a light on their uniqueness and what they have to bring into the world. And perhaps that's more important than ever right now, that we're able to do that, to really kind of bring that into focus and celebrate each of us for who we are.
Absolutely.
This has been such a great conversation, and we could go on far longer, but I'm aware we're coming up to the hour in our podcast conversation. And thank you for fitting what is a complicated, it isn't complex, but it's a rich and profound framework into a very short space. And maybe you can come back again and we could talk more about it and how it relates to both entrepreneurship and parenting, because I think there'd be a lot further to go with that discussion.
I'd love to do that again sometime. You got me fired up. You could probably hear in my voice as we talked about this throughout the whole hour. We've been talking different things you got me excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to find out more about you, Ben, where do they go?
Yeah, so there's 2 places. You can always find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Ben Dueck, and then look for, there's more than one Ben Dueck on there, but you can find me based on Cantera Leadership, and I have a website as well, but I'll spell that out. Cantera Leadership. And my website is canteraleadership.com. And that's where you can find me as well. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can find me on there as well. But LinkedIn is kind of the one that I try to focus on a lot more. And I encourage anyone who has listened to this podcast to find me on there, send me an invite, send me a little message saying you heard me on the podcast, and then let's see where that goes.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Ben. I really enjoyed this chat.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on, and all the best to you with what you're doing, Matt. I think you're sharing a good message with others, and to those of you listening, all the best in your journey as a dad and an entrepreneur as well. Big challenges on both of those, so keep up the good journey.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben.